Okay, let's talk about winning at sales. So we're going to go over three major things here. First is how to win sales presentations and negotiations. Then we're going to talk about how to make your prospect interested every single time. And then the third thing, and it's a really cool one, and that is the most underused strategy in sales, and that can 5x your sales, which is pretty insane to realize that so many people have all of this capacity to sell more that they're just not getting because they're not doing this really, really simple strategy. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of downloads that you can find underneath this video, so make sure to check those out. So let's first talk about how to win sales presentations and negotiations. And we're going to go over four major areas. The first is how to get success in sales before you even start the sales process. Then we're going to talk about power dynamics in sales. We're going to talk about handling objections easily. And if you've ever done any selling and someone comes in with an objection or they're just not ready now, this is going to be tailor-made for you in that. And then the last piece is guaranteeing effectiveness. So that's what we're going to talk about in this first segment. So first, success before starting. So most people, they focus on sales scripts, okay? And that's a start. And you'll see all these videos about sales scripts, how they're really important. They are important, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. There is not a magic sales script that will make all of your selling perfect. That just doesn't exist. It's just one piece of the puzzle. So if you're already thinking about sales scripts, great, but just understand that there is a lot more to it than just a sales script. And the most important thing, though, for the scripting piece is you do have to have some kind of script or a framework. You cannot wing a sales call and expect it to be successful. Sales and successful selling is a process. So if you're going to wing it, it's going to be a little bit different every time. You're not going to get better. Instead, getting better requires that you have a script or at least a framework that you go through every single time so you start to know what's working and what's not working. So have that format every single time. And if you're not closing, it's because you didn't use the methods that we're going to talk about here in scientific entrepreneurship to really determine what works and what doesn't work. So one of the resources that I have for you that you can get underneath this video is a sales conversion prep, sales conversation prep list. I'll just show it real briefly here. It is a prep checklist. So it's not a checklist for the sales call because every sales call is a little bit different, but it's to make sure that you're prepped for everything on the sales call. So when you get to the sales call, you have everything you need and you are completely prepped to absolutely kill it on that one session. So you can get access to that, of course. I'm not going to go over that in detail here because it is a checklist. So that's the first thing. You now understand that you need to think about success even before you start, and that is being prepared. And you've got now a preparation checklist, and you understand you need a sales script or you need a sales framework. I'll create other videos about that, and when you get access to the preparation checklist there, I'll make sure that anyone who's getting access to that also gets access to the sales scripting materials that I'm going to be doing. So that's success before starting. And now power dynamics, super important in sales. So this is if you've ever felt like you weren't really in control, you feel like the call is starting to slip away and the prospect is taking control of the call and you are just feeling the close slip away from you, then you know what I'm talking about here. And the key portion is that you have to be the guiding force of the call. You need to focus the prospect on the things that need to be accomplished on the call. We're going to talk about how exactly you do that. But the important thing is that you must be in control and you must be guiding the process. You must be the one who is setting the agenda and making sure it's driven to the agenda and making sure at the conclusion that you've wrapped it all up in a bow. If you let the prospect guide the process, you will have a terrible close rate. So it is very important that you do this. And again, if you have a sales script or a sales framework, it's much easier to do because you've got this map and now you know where you're starting, where you have to end up, and you have to know all the points that you hit along the way. So that's another important reason why the sales script is important, but the power dynamic is how you apply that script. So here's how we're going to do that. So first of all, you need to establish control early. Then we're going to talk about strategic asking, and you'll get examples of all these. Active listening, redirecting, and then establishing next steps. So these are the 5 things that you're going to do during the sales call to ensure that you have control over the situation. And again, if you don't have control of the situation, guess who's going to take it? The prospect is going to take it. And the prospect's agenda is not your agenda. They're not looking to help you sell. They're looking out for their own interests or, frankly, their own fears, which are going to prevent you from closing. So let's talk about establishing control early and what that entails. So at the beginning, you should really state the purpose of the call. When you're opening a sales call, when you're opening a sales presentation, you state the purpose. Then you outline all the topics that are going to be discussed, and then you talk about the outcome that you expect of the call. This sets the table. This sets the frame. And when you are the person who is saying, this is what's happening on this call, then you are the person who they're going to look to as a leader in the conversation. If, on the other hand, you just show up and you are unprepared and you don't have that framework and you haven't set the agenda, it sends the message that you are not a clear thinker. It sends the message, do I really want to do business with this company, with this person? Because they don't seem to have their act together. So here's an example. I created an example. I used to own a marketing agency, as you might know, that I sold a number of years ago. Here's an example from the agency context. And that's an example of an opener. The purpose of this call is to understand the outcomes you want from your social media marketing, see if you're a good fit for the solutions that we provide, and leave the call with a decision about whether or not we should work together. Now, look at the several things that I've done in here. So I've taken control. I said the purpose of this call. So I have set the purpose of the call, which means that I am in control. I'm the leader. In the power dynamic, I have control in this call. And the purpose is to understand the outcomes that you want from your social media marketing. What does that telegraph to them? That I'm listening. That I'm listening. I care about the outcomes that they want, and that the solution is in the context of the outcomes that they want. I'm not jamming them in with my solution, like, here's my truck, here's the shit I got on the truck, I'm trying to sell it to you. No, it's about a solution for a problem that you have identified for me. So that telegraphs that I am listening actively to them. And the next is to see if you're a good fit for the solutions that we provide. Now, this is pretty important because it is, again, saying that I choose you, you do not choose me. To see if you are a good fit for the solutions that we provide. Because as happened many times in my agency, I actually said no to a client or a prospective client because we couldn't help them. We wouldn't do a good job for them, so they wouldn't be a customer. I don't want a customer that's going to be unsuccessful, that's going to do terrible things for the brand. It's just going to be a terrible situation all around. We might get into a dispute. So here I'm outlining that I'm seeing if you are a good fit for me. It's a question of who is auditioning. Who's auditioning? Am I auditioning? No, they are auditioning to be a customer of ours. Again, power dynamics, and I'm taking it in the first sentence as I am laying the table for the entire conversation. And then the last piece is, and leave the call with the decision about whether or not we should work together. So I've set the outcome of this, of whether or not we should work together. Now this, to be honest, was in the context of a single close call. In other words, it was a one call close. There were some other calls that happened before it. So in this particular call, what I'm trying to do here is leave with a decision, customer or not customer. Now, if you have a more extensive selling process, then that's not a single call close. It might be leave the call with a decision about whether a next call makes sense or whether or not you are a fit. Something like that. So there are variations of this. Don't take this as the only way to do it, but you understand now the point of every single sentence in there and why I am establishing control at the beginning of the conversation. Okay, so you've established control early on in the call. So you are now the leader in the power dynamic in the sales conversation. You are now the leader. So now comes strategic asking, which is the second element that you have to think about in this sales call process. All right, it's about open-ended questions. What I want you to do is always be asking questions and staying in the driver's seat by being the question asker. Because the person who asks the question is the one who has the power. If you think about it, you go to a doctor's office and they are asking you questions. They've got their laptop or, I'm old. In those days, they'd have a clipboard and they'd be asking questions. Well, has this been happening? Has this been happening? And they're taking notes. You are the doctor in this situation, in the sales situation, because at the end of this situation, you are going to issue a prescription about what needs to happen. So you must act like the doctor. You must be interested in what they have to say. You're not trying to make friends here. You are trying to be interested You can be personable, but really ultimately you're diagnosing their problem, and the solution may or may not be what you have to offer. But at this point, you want to ask a lot of questions. So here's the example. You ask the prospect the results they're looking for. They say, oh, I want more leads. So then you can dig in. It's really easy. Tell me more. Tell me more about the leads. What kind of leads are you looking for? So when you ask, tell me more, you might find out that the problem that they came into the call with is not the problem that they actually have. In this example here, it's like they think they need more leads, but maybe it's not that they need more leads. It's maybe they have enough leads. It's that the leads are crappy. And the reason it's crappy is because their marketing is crappy. So they're getting crappy leads in there. So they're not closing them. So they think they need more and more and more because their close rate is terrible. But actually, it's not that. What's actually happening here is that they have bad leads. And that leads you to a different prescription in there. Now, whatever you're selling, whether it's a service, and I did this in a marketing agency context because everyone can understand it, but whatever you are selling, this process is the same if you're doing face-to-face or on the phone or on Zoom selling. Because when you have a individual sales context versus an online sales context, diagnostics are how you are maintaining the frame as the leader, and they're how you are going to be able to get higher pricing over time. So as you ask, tell me more, they're going to have aha moments along with you understanding what their real needs are. And those aha moments are like, wait a minute. Oh, maybe it is a leads quality problem. Associate that aha with you and elevate you now to the status of having diagnosed even better. So the strategic asking, the active listening here that we're going to talk about in a second is the way to be doing that. Okay, so now we go on to active listening. Very important. Don't tune out and always be thinking about what's the next thing that I'm going to say. And I see this a lot. And I used to do this when I was very, very young in my selling career, which is that I'd have a script and I'd rehearse the script. And I was so ready to say the next thing at the script that I wasn't really listening to what the prospect was saying. And that is a fatal mistake because your brain is going to be going over, well, what's the next thing I need to say? What's the next thing I need to say? And that's why, personally, I'm a fan of using a sales framework rather than a script. Now, I will use scripts for specific things, and I've memorized several scripts for specific things so that I can just bust them out, and I don't have to think about it. But I like to use a framework because it guides the conversation and conceptually, but I'm not always thinking like, am I going to say it exactly right? I've memorized a few things, a few key things, but I don't have the entire script memorized because then it's, I've never been an actor, but it seems like it's acting. And if the other party says something that is unexpected, I'll be like, oh, well, I wasn't really listening. I was rehearsing the next line in my head. So don't tune out. The best way to do this is after the prospect says something. So you've been asking, you've done that strategic asking. You say, well, what is, tell me more about those leads. And then they say, well, we're getting a bunch of leads and a lot of them just aren't converting. And, I'm not really sure how many more leads we need. It's like, well, how about the quality of leads? Are they good? Oh, well, the quality of leads, about 50 or 60% of them aren't great. So then you repeat back to them what they just said, something along the lines of, so what I hear you saying is, and then you repeat back and you paraphrase back what they said to you. Now, when you do that, a couple of things happen. Number one, it shows that you are listening. It demonstrates that you should, and that is a very important kind of piece of social glue, that when you are actively listening to someone and you can say back or paraphrase back using their own words and their own concepts, what they've said, they believe that they really are understood. And when they believe that they are understood, they will become more bonded to you than if they think that the agenda for this call is to shove information onto them. Right? We talked about this power dynamic and we talked about you being the doctor. And if they believe that you really truly understand their situation, then they are more likely to accept a solution that you will propose later on if it's a good fit. So active listening is that. Now, redirecting. I mentioned earlier that sometimes you'll be on a sales conversation and they will start to go off in a certain direction. And I like to think about this. I credit learning the straight line persuasion system for this. But really, there's one big takeaway from that, and I'll summarize it really quickly here. And that is, you think of a straight line between the open of the call and the end of the call. And your job is to keep as close as possible to that straight line. Not, again, on the script, but on the things that need to happen on that call. So if I need to ask certain questions, if I need to qualify them in certain ways, those are all on the straight line. And prospects will try to meander, okay? And they'll start talking about something. They'll start talking about the leads that they've gotten. They'll start talking about, so the leads are not great, and my cousin Nancy also has a marketing agency, and her leads are even worse, and her cat got sick the other day, and it's just going to start going off into Never Never Land. Your job is to kind of bat them gently back onto the line, back onto the straight line. So what you need to think about doing is say, oh, that's great. It's wonderful that she's got her own agency, but we're here to talk about your agency right now and what you should be doing in order to get that result that you wanted. And you gently bring them back onto the framework, okay? So the redirection is when they start to go astray, then you need to lead them back. The other piece of redirection is if they start to switch things around. Now, we talked about strategic asking, right? That's you asking them questions. They will try to ask you questions, and that is their attempt to grab the frame. That is part of the power dynamic. You are asking questions and you have the power. They will try to ask you for questions. So they might ask, what other customers do you have that are like us? Have you done any deals this big? Has this worked for somebody in whatever edge situation they have? They will try to do that, and that is their attempt to take power back. And I'm not saying that you dismiss those questions, but I say that you put those questions in the right place. So if you have not achieved along the straight line what you need to, and them asking questions is too early in the process because you haven't done your diagnosis, then you have to, again, gently bat them away and say, that's a really great question. Happy to answer that, but let's make sure that we have a fit here, and let's make sure that I can provide a solution for you before we jump into any of the details. And that just puts a pin in it, and a lot of times they'll just forget about the question because it'll be answered later on, or it isn't important really. It is their attempt to take control through asking a question, and it's just a reflex, right? So that's what redirection is. So it's a combination of you making sure that they're on the straight path between the beginning and the end and the agenda that you laid out, and making sure that they don't take control by asking you questions when it's not their time to ask questions. And again, I'll give more resources on how to do a sales call framework. That'll have to be a different video because it's going to be a long one. Okay, so then there's establishing next steps. So this is towards the end of the call. I'm shocked at how many times that I did not do this early in my career, and it was so dumb. And I want to make sure that you don't fall for the same problem here. At the end of the call, if you don't have a closed deal that is like actively signed physically on the call, I mean, there's some sales processes in which they pull up the contract and they watch them e-signed and they watch them type in the credit card numbers. Unless you have a signed contract with the money that has hit your account at the end of the call, you must have a next appointment. And the next appointment, it must be on the books and committed before you leave the call. So don't run up against the wire. Let's pretend that you've scheduled an hour for this call and you're at 57 minutes and they're still talking. It is important to stop and say, you know what? It's really important that we get a good result that works for everyone here. And it looks like we're coming up on our time. So what I want to do is put a call on the books with you for this afternoon and just put another time. And I said something that you might not have heard of before, this afternoon. Everyone talks about like next week. Why can't it be this afternoon? You have the momentum now. Things will only die. So have the next step, and have the next step be as soon as possible. So if you've got a call in the morning, there is no reason why you can't have a call in the afternoon. There's nothing that's going to change. You're just continuing the current conversation, but everyone defaults to next week or maybe the next day or a couple days from now. Why? There's nothing good that will happen for waiting. So the point is to not leave without another appointment. So if you're going to, for instance, send the contract and send the payment link, and you've got another, there's like, well, what's my next appointment there? Your next appointment is something that's on the calendar, which might be to confirm that all the paperwork is done, and it's going to be a 15-minute call, and it's going to be tomorrow at noon. So you'd ask them, well, how soon can you fill in the payment link and sign the contract. And they're like, oh, I think I can get to it in a couple days. Well, really, it should only take about 5 minutes. Well, I'm not sure. It's okay. How about this? I'm going to send it to you right after the call, and then we'll schedule a call for the end of the day today, and we can read over it together, and then I can just be there live while you do that. So that's one option. Or you can send it in, and then I'm going to put an appointment on the books where we're going to meet tomorrow at 9 a.m. After you've had a chance to ask your boss after hours today. And then we're going to go over the paperwork, and I'm going to actually provision your workspace with us, right? So maybe you got a SaaS product or something like that. So you actually set the kickoff call. So you can have an appointment for a signing, or you can have an appointment for a kickoff call. So I would always do this. So when they verbally committed to something, and if I didn't get a signature on the call by sending them a DocuSign where they could sign on the call, then I would at the very least set a kickoff call and say, okay, who needs to be there? And I'd get it on the calendar as soon as possible. And then I'd say, well, who else from your team needs to be on the call? And then I'd add them to the invite. So now it's like, oh shit, if I don't go through with this, the prospect is thinking, if I back out somehow, I'll have to explain to Sally from my company, who's already on this kickoff announcement, why that's being canceled. So establish next steps is the short of it. It is a very powerful way to make sure that the process does not fall off the rails. So if you need help with this, I've got another checklist, which of course is something that you will get underneath this video. Just view that real quickly. There's a post-sales meeting checklist as well to make sure that you're covering all of the steps to make sure that you are pushing this thing along all the way through close. So those are power dynamics. And even if you're amazing at them, I mean, this alone is an incredible amount of expertise once you get really good at this. But there are still a few things that you might need beyond power dynamics, and one of them is handling objections. Okay, so let's talk about handling objections, because this is something that everyone hates. I certainly hate it when I get objections on sales calls. I'm like, okay. There are 9 common objections that you should always be prepared for. And underneath this, I'm going to give you a solution to every single one of those objections. But here are the typical ones. So budget, and you've probably heard these if you've done any selling whatsoever, or frankly, if anyone's been selling something to you, you've probably used some of these yourself. And we're going to talk about how to get around each one of them. Okay, so budget. We don't have the budget for that right now. So you might have heard that one. Timing. Now isn't a good time. Or, when I redo my budget next year, or this quarter, we can't take on any new vendors. There's all kinds of timing issues. Authority. I need to check with my supervisor. I need to check with my boss. I need to check with my wife before making a decision. There is need. Well, we don't just really need this at this moment. It's just not, whatever. Urgency, which is something that I encounter all the time at my agency. It's like, we're doing fine. We can manage this now. It's just not a priority. Trust. I'm not familiar with you guys. Like, how do I know you're reliable? I'll leave aside that there's, again, I've got a bunch of trainings on this, and if you get the handouts that I've got here, I'll make sure that you can see a copy of those as well. I'm not familiar with your company. It means like your marketing sucks. So that's completely solvable, but let's go into sales right now. So I'm not familiar. How do I know that you're going to do what you're going to say? How do I know that you're reliable? And of course, looping back to power dynamics, your active listening is showing that you are going to be more reliable than 99%. So that will help this one a little bit. Satisfaction with the current solution. We're already working with somebody else. We're happy with our current setup. It's good enough, right? That's related to urgency. Features. Your stuff, it doesn't have this feature. Let's say that you're selling software or something, it just doesn't have a feature that they need, or again, let's go back to the agency example because I used to run one. This doesn't have, you guys don't do blank. Guys don't do podcast management, okay? But it could be anything, right? I mean, it could be a physical product. It could be a service that you're running. It doesn't matter. It could be a store. You don't sell a thing that we need. Or it could be the distribution channel doesn't have, you don't have some feature that they need. Or competitor reference. I can get a cheaper deal down the road. Okay? So these are the 9 most common. There are many different flavors of these, but if you prepare for these 9, you are going to be well ahead of most people doing sales. So each one has a response that you can give. Or better yet, prevent the objection from coming up. Okay, so that is the thing that I want to flag here. The best objection handling is to not have the objection come up on the sales call. It is to handle it before the sales call. And you do that with certain kinds of materials. So ideally, you will have had them go through a process, whether it's you before a call, sending them a bunch of stuff saying, hey, please watch this video, please read this before the call so that we can all be prepared. Maybe your marketing process as they come into your world has answered some of these on a website, and there have been testimonials and things like that. So the best way to handle all of these objections is before. But sometimes they're going to not have gone through that process. They will not remember they've gone through that process, and you're still going to get the objection. So I've provided for you an objection handling worksheet right here, again, linked below this video. And for each one of the objections, there is some recommendation of what you can do before the call, and then there is what you can do during the call, okay? So I'm not going to go into the detail because that is going to be another 30 minutes of that when you can just pull this worksheet and there's a space where you can write it as particular to you. So I've given an example of how to think about it. And then in the next space over on this worksheet, let me go back to that again. Your strategy here on the side, you can fill in what your strategy is going to be based on the concepts in there of how will you before the call get rid of that objection, and if you get it during the call, how are you going to deal with that? Okay, so that's handling objections, and now guaranteeing effectiveness. Okay, so we're taking a little bit of a left turn here. And we're going to talk about effectiveness in sales overall. So I've talked a lot about tactical things, but the sales effectiveness is really about math. Okay, how you know you're being successful is a combination of things. Like ultimately, it's, well, am I being profitable with me selling, my sales team selling? But you need to back into what is the math behind that. And math, I know, is scary for some people, but I'm going to make it easy with some calculators. So if you want to understand how to diagnose what's working, what's not working, you're going to obviously go through all of the things that we've gone through above. And you're going to fix your power dynamics. You're going to handle your objections. You're going to organize your calls, all of those things. But in order to guarantee effectiveness, if something's not working, and it probably isn't because you're watching this video, right? There's probably something you think that you can do better in your sales process or teach your team to do better in the sales process. If that is the case, then you want to diagnose what is going wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to a calculator, and there's a few things here. I'm not going to go again into detail, but you can get these. Of course, these will be linked as well underneath the video. Sales prospecting efficiency calendar. So what you can do here is calculate if your sales efforts are above or below a target to meet your financial metrics. So you know when you're doing sales, you have a financial goal, you have financial metrics. And also, if you're hiring a sales rep, especially an SDR, and I'll have a different video about what an SDR is, but essentially it's an appointment setter. It's someone who qualifies leads and gets them into the sales, the big sales conversation. You want to know what the metrics are. And this simple calculator is you fill in the yellow fields, things like how many qualified, if you think that you need to get X number of qualified leads per hour and you're paying an SDR to do that, how many per hour? And so, for instance, if you're only getting one every other hour here and you edit this number, this will tell you in the green here whether or not you're above or below target. So just enter these numbers and it'll change right here and it'll tell you how many leads per hour and your qualification rate. And if you're above or below your target for what you need to. So you've got a target leads per hour and target qualified per hour, qualified leads. And then you fill in these and it'll tell you if you're on target or not. So the good thing is you're going to know based on your financial metrics whether or not it works. And if you're hiring someone, this is a really good benchmark because you could say, oh, well, this is what it's been for me. And then this is what it should be for the person I hire. So it makes it very clear if they're performing or not. You don't just otherwise hire some salesperson and then hope that they're going to do well. You can actually have numbers here. Okay, so that's why it's called guaranteeing effectiveness, because you're going to know if they're meeting benchmark. You're going to know, frankly, if you're meeting benchmark. And if not, what number do I need to change? Do I need to close more per hour? Okay, does that mean I need to do more, have a better list? Do I have to have a better offer? Do I have to say it in a different way? What am I working on? Okay, and the next is the sales prospecting efficiency calendar. The sales conversation calendar. So this is how much, whether or not your sales conversations have good ROI. So in other words, you're paying a certain amount to generate the appointment. So maybe you're paying for leads, maybe you're paying for Google AdWords, you're paying affiliates, however you're paying to get some leads. And then you're going to spend some time with your SDR and your AE. And SDR, again, that's your appointment setter, and the AE is your sales rep. And those might both be you. Okay, so if they're both you just think about have different hats on, and when you are appointment setting, how many hours does it take you to set one appointment, and then when you're in the sales mode, how many hours does it take you to close the deal? And then you'll put hourly rates in here. If it's you, then you can the calculator won't work if you put 0 in here, but you have to kind of put what the hourly rate would be for if you were paying for this. And that's what's going to give you an idea when you can afford to hire a rep. Deal closure rate, average contract value, cost of delivery. It's going to calculate all of these things and tell you if your current setup is cost effective and you should continue putting more money into it, hire more reps, or it's going to say, slow down, whoa, you need to fix these numbers before you try to scale. So that's what that calculator does there. That's the sales conversation ROI calculator. Okay. So when I talk about scientific entrepreneurship, when I'm talking about the concept of using these little experiments and using data and using these numbers to drive your business, this is what I'm talking about. It is boiling everything down into understanding what effectiveness is. So I've given you a bunch of tactics here, and you'll be able to measure those tactics, right? Because you're going to see, oh, I was selling this way before, and now I've really started to pay attention to power dynamics. I've started to handle objections differently, and my close rate is going up. Excellent. I hope you've been measuring your close rate, okay? And if you haven't, now's the time to start. And now you can see guaranteeing effectiveness. You're always looking at these numbers, and looking at these numbers is your source of truth. And this is what effective sales is. This is how you become a sales god, is because you are paying attention to what the results are, and then you're asking yourself, what number do I need to move? Do I need to get better at sourcing leads? Do I need to get better at qualifying leads? Do I need to get better at getting them to the next call? Do I need to get, you can ask it, because it's just a chain of events that is happening. And in the chain, you're going to see what's the weakest link. And this is that process of scientific entrepreneurship. So now we've finished the first piece, which is winning sales presentations and negotiations. And let's talk about how to make them interested every single time. Because sometimes you get somebody and they're just not interested. So what are you going to do about that? People's interests will vary over time. They're not always interested in what you have to offer, right? They've got other things going on in their lives. The example here is if you wanted to sell me a bed right now, I'm not interested. I have a bed. It's good enough. And you can yell at me all you want, and you can shout discounts at me, and I'm not going to care because I don't need the bed. But when I go home today, and my wife has left, and she's taken all the furniture, and I don't have a bed, you better believe I'm really interested in a bed at that point. So my situation has changed. You haven't changed, but my situation as the prospect has changed. And so people's interest will vary over time, and you have to catch them at the right point. All right. So if you're losing sales too early, if it feels like you've reached out and they're just not interested, it's because you're not engaging them where they are. You have to engage the prospect where they are, not where you are. And usually, if you were just thinking in a ram it through sales way of thinking about it, you're thinking about it as what we call bottom of the funnel. You're thinking that everyone is ready to buy, and you're shouting at everyone to buy now, and you are ignoring the fact that 90-something% of the people are not ready to buy now. So you are wasting a lot of energy and a lot of prospects, and you're looking like an asshole trying to sell to people who aren't ready to buy. So why do you lose the sale early? You might be shouting to someone a message that's at the purchase stage, buy now, buy now, buy now, but the person is at the top. They're at their awareness stage. Yeah, they kind of know. It's like, I kind of know their bed's out there, all right? But then my wife is threatening to leave me, and I was like, oh shit, am I going to have to move out, and then I'm going to need to buy a bed? And I got some vague interest in it, but it's like, oh no, she's moved out, she's taken the furniture. All of a sudden, I drop all the way down here, okay? But you can make this for any analogy. We can map this to a marketing agency. We can map this to a SaaS kind of sales process. We can map this to a multi-tier distribution channel, because if you're selling into distributors, likewise, they have certain needs for certain products that are being met or not met by the other providers in the space. It's still a sales process. And every single one of those, they've got different messages. that need to be sent based on stage of awareness. So you have to think about tailoring that contact and that message to where they are. That's why you're losing through it, because you're shouting at them and they're not ready to hear that. Okay? So how do we make the prospect fall in love? That is the question. So I like to think about it like dating. All right? Would you propose marriage the first time you meet someone in a coffee shop? Well, I'm sure someone somewhere has done that. However, that is very unlikely to work. And if you keep on doing it, maybe you'll find somebody, but you're probably not going to find a very high quality person, because it's the person who is willing to just, run forward at that first meeting at a coffee shop. Instead, think about it like romance, okay? As your prospect moved down the funnel, you should have materials that meet them where they are, right? In a coffee shop, it's about some conversation and you're finding out what they're interested in. Oh, well, guess what? In the marketing context, you're finding out if they might be vaguely interested in what you have to sell. If you are selling backyard playgrounds to somebody who doesn't have children, it's not a conversation they're going to engage with, but they might engage with a piece of content that you put out that talks about 5 ways to keep your kids busy during the summer when the school is out. And that's like, oh, wow, I want to know about that. And there are these materials that you can put out there that are going to get them engaged in the thinking about something in the category of what you have to offer, so that you can lead them down the path towards the fact that your backyard play structures are exactly the thing that they need. All right. There's a distinction here, which I think is one of the most important things to remember, which is the difference between convincing someone to buy something and them feeling compelled to buy it. And the ones that are compelled to buy it because they feel that they've come to the conclusion themselves will be much better customers, will be much easier prospects to close on the sales call than the ones where you're there and you're trying to convince them that it is a good idea. So this is the distinction: convince versus compel. Okay? So if they feel compelled to engage you because your sales process has gone from the backyard activities during the summer, and maybe that gave some options, and some of the options are DIY, and then there's the backyard playground set that you can just install for them, and they go down. It's like, well, here are some of the ways in which this is really cost effective. These are ways your kids will have their friends coming over, so they're safely playing in your backyard instead of running about town. And then you can lead them out, oh, well, here's a little tool where you can construct your own one so that you can see what it's going to cost. So there's a cost calculator. And then if you want to talk to us, then you can get on there and they can actually have a conversation with a sales rep, but the sales rep is asking them questions. Do your kids like swings? They're asking them questions. And then the prospect becomes involved in the conversation. This is the process that you need to think through for your particular offer. Okay? So you're going to break down each stage in your sales process by customer awareness. Okay? How aware are they of having a specific need? All right? And then decide what materials make sense. I've given you the backyard play structure example, but this works for anything. This works if you have any kind of services business. When I was an attorney, it worked for law firm services as well. It always works. This is a fundamental. I'm not saying that you can't buy by just shouting buy into someone's face. There's a certain percentage, a small percentage of people who do that. But if that's the strategy that you use, it's going to be really time expensive. If you're paying for leads, it's going to be money expensive. And it is not going to be terribly effective, and you're going to get shittier customers because those customers are not going to be ones that are truly engaged and have come to the conclusion through your materials that this is a good decision. They'll be more likely to refund. They'll be more likely to be unhappy and to churn out. But a customer who's gone through this process is going to be one that is actually a good customer and will be easier to close. All right. So make sure that you're tracking your prospects in your CRM so that you can recognize what stage they're in. And pretty much every CRM, you can put stages, and those are usually used just for stages of the sales process. But sometimes, if you are being more effective about this, what I'm recommending you do here are have specific materials that get sent to the prospect at each stage along the process, so that you know where they are, and then you know what materials to be sending them. Okay. And no matter how small the lead pipeline, you must do this. If you are only getting 2 leads a month, you still should be doing this because you need to maximize those 2 leads. They are precious. So don't skip this. I do have a sales cycle tuning checklist here. Again, below this video, you'll get access to that. So that's another checklist for you. Okay, grand finale now. We're getting to the most underused strategy that can 5x your sales. Let me close these guys so that we can focus on that. and drum roll please, the most underused strategy to 5x your sales. Okay, some very important numbers here. 80% of sales require 5 follow-up calls or more to close. This is a broad study. And unfortunately, 48% of salespeople never even make a single follow-up attempt. Now, maybe you're an outlier and you make 1 or 2. Most are not getting anywhere near the 5. 60% of customers say no 4 times before they say yes. But 92% of salespeople give up after 4 no's. Okay? So what we're seeing here is a real disconnect between what it takes and what most people are doing. And this is probably you, and it was me for a long period of time. And that's okay because we can fix it now. All right? You just know that follow-up is critical. So this one thing can change the trajectory of your sales forever if you do it. And we just talked about having a CRM, and this is going to make sure that you are following up because it's going to be in your face. The statistics consistently indicate that around 5 follow-up calls or touch points are needed to successfully close the majority, around 80% of sales deals. Now, this was a broad study across multiple industries and across multiple different kinds of products and multiple different kinds of customers. So might some edge cases be a little bit different? Yes, but like, why chance it? You have the opportunity here to close so much more business. And if you were just giving up after 1 call, no calls, you are missing out on a huge percentage of it. So we have the data on this, right? I talked to you about being scientific about this. You have the data. Do not fight the data. It is telling you that you need to follow up more. And if you follow up more, you will get better results. It is so much easier to reopen a conversation. I'm going to show you how to do it in an easy way. It is so much easier to reopen a conversation that already has begun than to start cold again. And like, oh no, I have to start and have yet another conversation about someone who is skeptical. I have to overcome the objections and all that. Or you can have already done that. And maybe there was an actual budget timing issue. And maybe there was an actual issue about, well, we've got an existing contract and it doesn't lapse until such and such time, and they couldn't say yes at that time. Or maybe they just kind of fell off the face of the planet and you don't know where they went. By following up, this is one of the single most important activities that you could do to actually change your sales trajectory. All right, now let's talk about how you make it happen. All right. So just because they said no now does not mean that they bought something else. Very often they have done nothing. Because remember, often you are not selling against a competitor when in the sales process. Very often you are selling against inaction, the choice to do nothing, because sometimes it just is easier. So think of a no as a not now rather than a no. All right. The customers, they have other things going on. And what you don't want to do at this point is nurture with content. Okay. This is not, again, I talked about not being an asshole and not yelling at them and saying, how about now? How about now? How about now? And trying to hard sell all the time. But you can follow up with content that makes them feel like you have their best interests in mind. Okay. So talk about, you can send case studies because those might be relevant. You can send information about the industry. You can send information that might be a helpful guide or a checklist. You see all these checklists I'm giving you here? These are helpful things, right? You probably want to see some of those checklists. Well, what if you did the same in your selling process, right? So you tailor the follow-up content to continue delivering value, address their needs. So the bad thing is, you want to buy now? The good thing is, here's something that you might find helpful. Okay, so think about that for the content strategy. And because I know you want to ask the question, how much should I follow up? I've given you a big generalization, but this is a follow-up calendar, all right? Typical timeframes for following up with a prospect, it might be 2 to 3 months. I have had prospects that I had a sales conversation with, and they vanished. But because I followed up for 3 years, I landed it. So back when I was an attorney, many moons ago, I would follow up forever. It was the phrase is follow up until they buy or die. This is the phrase that I heard, and I wish I could attribute who said that first. But I would follow up, and it took one prospect 3 years. But then they became a client, and that was 6 figures worth of revenue for just doing a quick follow up with a piece of content that I had already created once a month, 3 years. But that was worth 6 figures to me. And if you have a sales assistant, they can be doing this. It doesn't have to be you. And I've done other videos on this, but you can have a sales assistant that is, a virtual assistant offshore that is doing this kind of stuff for you. So it doesn't have to be a heavy lift. And because it's not you hard pitching each time, it is not perceived as you being a jerk because it's with content. All right. So here is a generalized follow-up calendar. Day 1, 2 days later, 7 days, 14, 30, and then once a month if still no response. And do it forever until they tell you to stop. There is also a follow-up strategy checklist here, follow-up timing, frequency, content, all of that. So you can take a look at that underneath this video. And that is what we have for how to become a sales god. If you do the things that we're talking about in this presentation, if you use the tools that I have given you, this is worth more than 99% of any of the sales courses that I've seen out there, and you can have it now for free. All you have to do is download this stuff and put this into place. I've given you all the checklists. Here are the downloads right there. You're going to get access to all of those things underneath this video.